In the basement of the Cairo Museum, behind a door marked Restricted Access, sits a limestone slab that has not been on public display since it was catalogued in 1938. It measures approximately 90 centimeters across. It shows no gods, no pharaohs, no funeral procession. What it shows is a device. The slab is catalogued as CG 7741 in the Cairo Museum archive. It was recovered from the Abydos temple complex in Upper Egypt by Egyptologist Salim Hassan during his 1938 survey of a chamber now designated AS7. Hassan was not a peripheral figure. He is considered one of the most rigorous field scholars of his generation, responsible for some of the most comprehensive documentation of Egyptian subterranean architecture ever completed. His survey notes, held under reference CG 8944 in the Cairo Museum, describe the north wall of AS7 in careful detail. He transcribed the top register fully. He transcribed the bottom register fully. The middle register, the one containing the device diagram, he logged as containing technical iconography inconsistent with surrounding ceremonial context. Then he moved to the next chamber. No published analysis of what the device physically depicts has appeared in the 86 years since. The question this video is built around is not whether the ancient Egyptians moved massive stone across desert terrain. They did. The logistical record is substantial and well documented. The question is narrower and harder to dismiss. It concerns the last fraction of a millimeter. The tightest joints in the Great Pyramid at Giza measure less than half a millimeter across. The tightest joints produced in modern experimental reconstructions using period-accurate tools measure in full millimeters. No ramp, no sledge, no team of skilled laborers applying direct physical force to a multi-ton limestone block controls final placement to sub-millimeter precision. The labor model has a mechanism for moving the stones. It does not have a mechanism for the fit. That gap is where CG 7741 becomes relevant. For decades, researchers who encountered the middle register of the AS7 north wall applied the standard interpretive frame for cylindrical forms, with radiating elements in Egyptian temple art, solar symbolism, divine emanation, sacred sound rendered as visual metaphor. That reading is understandable. Egyptian temple walls are filled with visual shorthand for cosmic force, and the default classification of an unfamiliar object as symbolic requires no further investigation. When something is labeled a metaphor, the analysis ends. What none of the published treatments examined was what the diagram looks like when you apply the interpretive conventions the Egyptians themselves used for technical drawings rather than ceremonial ones. When Egyptian draftsmen wanted to show how something worked on the inside, they drew it in cross-section. The same convention appears in Egyptian depictions of boats, storage containers, architectural plans, and irrigation infrastructure. The cross-section view is the convention of the engineer, not the priest. The AS7 cylinder is drawn in cross-section, its interior visible, its walls cut away to show horizontal banding, the same convention used in Egyptian technical drawings to indicate layered materials or compartmental structure. The 8 exterior projections are drawn with the curved line treatment the Egyptians reserved for vibration or functional emanation from an operating object. And above the cylinder, separated by a gap of empty space, sits a rectangular stone block, proportioned exactly like a pyramid casing stone. Between the device and the block, there are no ropes, no levers, no human hands, nothing. The diagram is not rendered in the visual language of Egyptian religious art. It is rendered in the visual language of Egyptian technical documentation. That distinction has not appeared in any published analysis of the chamber. But that is only part of it. Beneath the device diagram, running across the second register of the same north wall, is a text passage. For decades, Translations rendered it as a description of divine elevation, a god lifting the soul toward the heavens. The standard reading for passages involving upward movement in an Egyptian temple context. That reading relies on treating the determinative markers as theological. But determinative markers in Egyptian hieroglyphic writing are not decorative. They are grammatical classifiers, small symbols attached to words that specify the category of thing being described. The determinative attached to the object being acted upon in this passage is not the marker for divine phenomena. It is the determinative used for heavy objects requiring mechanical assistance, the same marker attached to Egyptian texts describing the transport of obelisks, the repositioning of pyramid casing stones, and the movement of large boat hulls during construction operations. That determinative does not appear in any other divine elevation passage in the Egyptian corpus. Its presence in this text is either a carving error made by a skilled monumental scribe working in formal limestone, which is essentially without precedent in the documented record, or it is telling you exactly what category of object is being moved. The passage then describes the result using a phrase that translates as suspended continuously, not lifted and placed, not raised to the divine realm, suspended, continuously. The third stage verb describing final placement is borrowed directly from the Egyptian vocabulary of boat steering, the application of directional pressure through a medium rather than direct physical contact with the object itself. 3 stages: activation, continuous suspension, guidance through adjustment rather than contact. Written in the Grammatical Register of Engineering Documentation. Every video on this channel goes directly to the catalog numbers, the archived field notes, and the peer-reviewed supplementary tables that do not make it into the published summaries. No narration added, no mythology layered on. If you want the primary source, the subscribe button is there. And the next video goes deeper than this one. Here is where it gets specific. One inscription in one chamber in Abydos could be anomalous. It could represent a local scribal convention, an isolated iconographic experiment specific to the priests of that complex. What changes the weight of the evidence is what was documented 2,000 kilometers away, at a site that predates the Egyptian pyramid complex by at least 7,000 years. Göbekli Tepe sits in the Taurus foothills of southeastern Turkey, near the modern city of Anlurfa, and it is the oldest known ritual monument complex on Earth. Its carved limestone pillars were erected by people who had not yet developed agriculture or permanent settlement. In the year 2000, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt published field documentation of Pilar 43 at Göbekli Tepe, a structure now referred to in the academic literature as the vulture stone, for its prominent animal carvings. Among the carved imagery, Schmidt logged one recurring abstract element, a forked rod held at a consistent downward angle by a figure rendered without a head. He classified it as an unidentified cultic implement and continued his documentation. There is no evidence in any published record that Schmidt was ever aware of CG 7741 or the AS7 chamber at Abydos. He was not looking for a parallel. He found one regardless. In 2017, geologist Robert Schoch, whose peer-reviewed work on the geological dating of the Sphinx enclosure at Giza has been a subject of formal academic debate for 3 decades, and who holds a doctorate from Yale University, presented a geometric analysis at the annual meeting of the Geological Society of America. The forked rod appears multiple times across the carved surface of Pillar 43. In every instance, it is rendered at a consistent downward angle of 33 degrees from horizontal. Schoch flagged this angular consistency as architecturally significant. What his presentation did not include, because the comparison had not been made in any published forum, was the fact that the control implement depicted in the AS7 inscription at Abydos held by an operator figure standing at a measured distance from the cylinder, appears at the same angle, 33 degrees. 2 sites, 7,000 years of separation, 2,000 kilometers of distance. No known cultural transmission pathway connecting them. At this point, the mainstream position deserves to be stated completely and fairly, because it is not a weak argument. The consensus model of pyramid construction is supported by substantial primary source documentation. The Wadi al-Jarf papyri, discovered in 2013 on the Red Sea coast of Egypt, are first-hand logistical records from the reign of Khufu describing organized work gangs, the river transport of limestone blocks by barge, and coordinated sledge operations written by administrators who were present during construction. Tool marks on unfinished obelisks at the granite quarries in Aswan confirm the physical labor of skilled workers over extended periods. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that large stone blocks can be moved on wetted sand and wooden sledge trackways with measurable efficiency using rope and human pulling force. Iconographic parallels across ancient cultures are documented and common, and do not require shared origin or contact. Humans working with similar materials under similar physical constraints independently arrive at similar tool shapes. A forked rod held downward is a plausible independent invention at any point in human history. The angular consistency noted by Schoch could reflect the geometry of the carving surface or an artistic convention rather than a transmitted technical standard. These are reasonable positions held by credentialed researchers with full access to the archaeological record. They account for the movement of the stones. They do not account for the fit. Now consider what these 3 lines of evidence look like when they are placed alongside each other, rather than evaluated in isolation. A technical schematic in Egyptian cross-section convention depicting a device with 8 evenly spaced projections in a suspended stone block with no contact mechanism between them. An engineering register text passage attached to that schematic, carrying the heavy object determinative and describing 3 operational stages: activation, continuous suspension, and contact-free guided placement in the vocabulary of boat steering, not theology. And an identical control implement geometry, rendered at the identical angle, documented at the oldest ritual monument complex on Earth, 7,000 years earlier and 2,000 kilometers to the north, by a researcher who had never heard of the Abydos chamber. The convergence is specific. It is not a cluster of vague similarities. It is a geometric angle, a tool configuration, and an operational sequence, all pointing toward the same physical principle. In 2014, Dr. Yoichi Ochiai and his team at the University of Tokyo published research in Applied Physics Letters demonstrating 3-dimensional acoustic levitation using a phase-adjustable emitter array configured around a central resonating axis. Objects placed in the standing wave field were suspended at pressure nodes and moved through space with precision by adjusting the phase relationship between individual emitters. No contact required. The suspended objects followed the shifting nodes smoothly, continuously, guided by the physics of the field rather than by physical force. In 2019, Dr. Asir Marzo's team at the University of Bristol extended the demonstrated upper mass limit of acoustic levitation to 70 grams using high-intensity ultrasonic arrays, noting in their published paper in Applied Physics Letters that the scaling relationship between emitter power output and liftable mass is linear. The physics places no categorical ceiling on liftable mass. It places a ceiling proportional to the energy of the field. 8 evenly spaced curved projections around a resonating cylinder is precisely the emitter configuration acoustic engineers use today to generate a stable, standing wave field. The geometry is not approximate. It is the geometry. The three-stage process in the AS7 inscription activation. Continuous suspension. Guidance through phase adjustment maps onto the University of Tokyo procedure directly, not as a loose analogy, as a one-to-one correspondence between a text carved into white limestone in 1300 BCE and a laboratory procedure first formally demonstrated in the 21st century. And then there is the sentence at the bottom of the wall that no published translation has reproduced in full. The lower register of the AS7 north wall contains a single sentence that Salim Hassan's 1938 field notes describe as damaged and unclear. High-resolution photographs of the north wall taken by an independent researcher in 2019 and currently held in the Cairo Museum Photographic Archive show the lower register intact, undamaged, and fully legible. The sentence reads, "This is the secret of the first builders, carried from the time before the flood, not to be shown to those who were not initiated. Not Seti the First, in whose reign the surrounding inscription was carved around 1300 BCE. Not a New Kingdom invention. Inherited knowledge, explicitly named, attributed to a prior civilization using the same grammatical construction the Egyptians used when attributing metallurgical techniques, water management systems, and astronomical calculations to earlier sources. It is attribution language. Someone carved a technical schematic into formal monumental limestone and specified that the knowledge it depicted was not theirs. It was older. It was transmitted. The device had a prior history the carvers considered important enough to record. That statement is still there, carved into the wall, photographed, archived, unanalyzed in any peer-reviewed publication. The north wall of Chamber AS7 is still standing inside the Abydos temple complex in Upper Egypt, approximately 500 kilometers south of Cairo, on the west bank of the Nile, near the modern town of El Baliana. All three registers are intact. The device diagram is carved in the formal monumental script of the reign of Seti I. The lower register inscription is complete and legible in photographs held at the Cairo Museum. The block catalogued as CG7741 sits in Storage Gallery C of the Cairo Museum. It is not fragile. It is not lost. It is limestone, sitting in a controlled storage environment, waiting for a published analysis that has not been conducted in 86 years. Permits to conduct independent academic study of the AS7 chamber have been restricted since 2002, with no published timeline for restoration. In 2008, a team of acoustic engineers from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology filed a formal permit application with Egyptian Antiquities authorities to conduct acoustic resonance testing inside the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid at Giza, specifically to measure whether chambers, granite dimensions produce standing wave frequencies consistent with levitation application. The application was denied. The denial letter cited potential acoustic damage to ancient surfaces. The King's Chamber is constructed entirely of solid Aswan granite, one of the hardest and most acoustically stable natural materials on Earth. The permit was denied regardless. The application, the denial letter, and the acoustic research it proposed are all part of the documented record. The inscription is still on the wall. The photographs are in the archive. The permits have not been granted. And in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid at Giza, in a room built from solid granite whose precise interior dimensions have never been tested for acoustic resonance by an independent engineering team, the standing wave frequencies that modern physics would predict from those dimensions have never been formally measured.